Welcome to Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. Today, my dear subscribers and my listeners, I'd like to focus one more time on the issue of Russian-Ukrainian war. Specifically, my topic today is President Trump, or to put it in more blunt way, is the question, have the Russians given up on President Trump's initiatives? So, to do that, the good point to start is the so-called August Idyllia, August meeting in Alaska, which for many at that time was a signal of a possible breakthrough. It was perceived in the Russian society as a Trump initiative that generated genuine enthusiasm, and some people were just couldn't contain their positive feelings about President Trump and how that's a new beginning, and there would be a meeting, and there was excitement how he met President Putin in the airport and shook his hand, and then the red carpet and all this pageantry. There was a lot of expectation that a breakthrough was possible and probably imminent. So since then, a lot of things have changed, and this is what I'd like to focus on now. Basically, what has happened since then is that it has become clear that Trump did not want to discuss Russian terms. Everything since then was about a meeting with Zelensky, or a meeting with Trump and Zelensky and Putin, or meeting of Zelensky and Putin separately. There was all this talk about the format, but not about the substance. Western media has not at all highlight what exactly the Russian conditions were, which was, as I've mentioned many times, the 4 provinces plus it's called sometimes Minsk Plus, Russian language rights, Russian Orthodox Church rights, restoration of civil institutions, elected institutions, legitimacy of Zelensky, etc., etc. But none of that was discussed publicly. All the talk of the media was just completely sidetracked into, will there be a meeting or will not there be a meeting between Zelensky and Putin, as if a meeting in itself, by itself, could solve anything. So the talk about the Western media was at that time how to bring Putin to the negotiating table, and the coalition of the willing was forced to force Putin to the negotiating table, which actually sounded quite silly because Putin was at the negotiating table because the Russians have presented very clearly their demands. The question to be discussed was, could they be met or not? And if not, why not? And which of them could be met and which couldn't be met? And that would be considered negotiations. So this was the first major disillusionment, that the Russians discovered that the Western so-called partners did not really talk about the substance, but all about the format. The next thing was, next major disillusionment was that the message that Trump sent to Europe, which was a big blow to any expectations of a deal with Trump. Trump's message to Europe was, buy our weapons, don't buy Russian oil, and punish countries that do buy Russian oil. So the very positioning of that kind of a definition of the problem, that Russian oil has to be stopped because it feeds Russian military effort, that in itself, from the Russian point of view, is a hostile position. And Trump adopted it by saying, you Europeans go first to impose sanctions on countries that deal with Russia, and then we will do that too. Now that, even a theoretical possibility of that, is a hostile position, which means it undermines any effort to have a peaceful negotiated settlement, because it basically exposes Trump as a hostile position, that wants to undermine Russian legitimate exports of oil, gas, and other natural resources. So that was a big blow too. Now, the European position in the last several weeks was also, from the Russian point of view, very, very hostile. There was again talk about coalition of the willing. That was nothing new, but what was new is a specific plan that appeared about the sending expeditionary force to Ukraine under the guise of peacekeepers, but in fact it boiled down to occupation of Ukraine, division it into spheres of influence, and what was particularly enraging for the Russians was that Romanian forces were to be stationed in Odessa. Now, for those of you who don't know, Romania was an ally of Nazi Germany during World War II, and in 1942, 43, 44, it was Romanian forces that actually occupied Odessa together with the Nazis, the Germans. So the very mention of Romanian troops as part of NATO now planning to occupy Odessa generated a very, very hostile or enraging or maddening, you could call it, reaction in the Russian military circles and the public opinion at large. So that actually, I think, is one of the reasons why the General Staff made a report in which, in the background, the map of territories that that were in dispute and by implication were a target of Russia's advance included Odessa and Kharkov, which in Russia is known as the Novorossiya. These are territories that were traditionally a part of Russia and that were assigned to Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic by Lenin in 1922 when they organized the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, USSR. So control of Odessa became de facto, if not officially proclaimed, goal of the Russian offensive. Now, the next point that needs to be discussed is the way Zelensky made some new pronouncements over the last a couple of weeks. And that is that he started talking about victory, that he's been always talking about victory, but now he defined victory as that Ukraine managed to preserve its statehood. That was an interesting turn, and many interpreted that as a signal that he was willing, or what he is being forced by his Western partners, to accept some loss of territory in the Donbass. On the other hand, this was at the same time as there was this the drone affair. Now, the Western media keeps talking about Russian drones in Poland, Russian drones in Romania. Now, when I listen to Russian generals' assessment of it, they all completely, 100%, all of them, say this was a setup, that there were no Russian drones in Poland, that they were sent there by Zelensky. This is his style, to set up some major provocation that would look like a Russian aggression in order to bring the Western powers into direct confrontation with Russia, Article 5, Article 4, NATO, blah, 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 to get the West to fight for Russia. Now, I'm not a military specialist, but I'm reporting to you that all Russian military specialists, all of them, 100%, say that there were no Russian drones sent to Poland. The ones that were there were was sent by the Ukrainians in order to provoke conflict with NATO and get them to join the conflict. So from the Russian perspective, Zelensky's record reveals him to be unreliable one more time. On the one hand, he says that Ukraine preserved its statehood, and therefore the territories could be recognized as lost. On the other hand, he again and again tries to provoke Western participation in the war. Which actually means that there is a growing conviction among those who make decisions that this regime has to go. There's no way one could make any deal with Zelensky, because today he says one thing and the next day he's going to do another thing, and at the first opportunity he's going to join NATO, and therefore this is unacceptable, and that has to stop. So this is the next conclusion that the Russians have made. And finally, I'd like to focus a little bit about the new attitudes in the Russian society, which is interesting, because the predominant attitude in the last months was that Putin determines what is going to be the terms. And everybody just basically reiterated his position that his or her position that Putin will negotiate a settlement. And that boiled down to 4 provinces, neutrality, no foreign troops, etc. But lately there's been new developments. On the one hand, as I mentioned, the General Staff has produced a map that included Odessa and Kharkov, or all of Novorossiya, as a part of Russian territorial claims. On the other hand, there is a growing disillusionment with Trump, and absolute and total distrust and hostility to the intentions of the European Union and NATO. And at the same time, there is a new element which I haven't discussed yet before, and that is attitudes in the army. And what I listened to the Russian generals discussing the Russian army, what they notice is that this is a large army, more than 1 million people, just in Ukraine, in addition to new contingents that are being built in Belarus and in the western parts around about St. Petersburg and facing the Baltic countries and the Baltic Sea. In other words, there's a kind of a growing contingent of officers and junior officers that rose through the ranks during the war, during the last 3 years. And these people are very, very patriotic. And one of the generals suggested that if they perceive that the conditions that the president would accept would be less than what they hope for, there may be serious discontent. In other words, put it differently, we have a lot of people in Russia who have lost relatives, at least 300,000 losses. And they cannot be just written off. They have to be for victory and nothing short of victory. So what we have in Russia is a kind of a growing patriotism on the part of the army and those that are connected with it, which is all the relatives and friends and people in the military industry, a big part of Russian society. They don't want just a compromise with the Zelensky regime, which is seen as pro-NATO, pro-the West. So they don't want that compromise. They want victory. And the way they define victory as a minimum, which is Novorossiya and a regime in Kiev, which is not aligned with the West, that is neutral and preferably is friendly to Russia. That's the very basic minimum. Others go further and say that the entire Ukraine has to be controlled by Russia to prevent any further provocations from Europe. So that means that the room for maneuver of President Putin, who is very, very attentive and has been for years to the attitudes and feelings of people in order to maintain his popularity, that means the room for concessions is diminishing. And that is most likely that he would pursue the policy that would generate success and support, which means it seems to be a military victory that would satisfy those who believe Russia should have all of Novorossiya. So this is where we are, my dear subscribers. Please subscribe to my channel. I regularly do the updates of the current affairs in this playlist, Issues of Contemporary Politics with Dr. Brovkin. And please read my book, From Vladimir Lenin to Vladimir Putin, in the description. Thank you. Bye.